journalist sharing her career journey with us today. If there are any students tuning in, please fill in the survey for a chance to win a $50 gift certificate and give us some feedback on how we can improve these career presentations. So with that, I will turn it over to Larissa.
Thank you, Mr. West. Hi, everybody. My name is Larissa, and I work as a staff reporter, which means that I'm a print and digital journalist. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my career and what I do every day and why it is so cool. So if I could get the next slide, Mr. West. Perfect. So I currently work at a weekly newspaper called the Moose Jaw Express. Our circulation every week is about 60,000 people because we go to both our community and all of the surrounding rural communities. And we also operate an online news site as well called Moose Jaw Today, which we've partnered with Glacier Media. It's a really big media company out of BC. And so I get to do a little bit of both. I get to work in print, I get to work online, and there are little differences between the two, but they really complement each other super well. I joined this newsroom just over 2 years ago, right after the website launched. And I came into it with a bachelor's degree in English from the University of Saskatchewan, which is kind of an unusual way to go into journalism. A lot of people prefer like a journalism certificate, but I took English because I liked English. And I'm also working on a copy editing certificate from Simon Fraser University from their distance education program. So a little unusual, I guess, but definitely not unheard of. And I've got a couple of scholarships listed on there as well that were communication scholarships that might be of interest to someone looking into this industry. Yeah, next slide. Thank you. So what I do would actually be considered news reporting. So I work in a newsroom with several people to kind of cover daily things that are happening, interesting information that's being released to the public, kind of like the big headlines that you would see on the 6 o'clock news, but in print. So what I've done on this slide is I've actually listed out a list of the things that I do every time I get an assignment story in order, consecutively. This is kind of where I start and where I end up. So I do this for, stories about current events, stories about community initiatives, every time I do some event coverage, any kind of information shared through press releases. The best example of that right now would be information shared by the Health Authority about COVID-19. I spend a lot of time digging through their news release page online and finding questions that I want to ask them to find out more. So the first thing I do is I do a little research, kind of find what kind of questions that I would like to ask when I move on to the second step, which is interviewing a person. You gotta always talk to your source and get information from a credible source before you can publish it. And it's, I think, one of the funnest parts of this job, actually. I get to talk to all kinds of really cool people who are generally pretty passionate about what we're talking about. And then, of course, once you've kind of done that and you've gotten your 5 W's, who, what, when, where, why, you're able to sit down and write your story. And sometimes picking an angle for your story happens in that sort of beginning stage, the research and interview stage. Sometimes it happens after, when you actually sit down and start thinking about how you want it to read. Sometimes it's the toughest part, sometimes it's the easiest part. Everybody kind of has their own things that they're really good at. I personally have trouble with headlines, but picking an angle is usually pretty easy for me. And then while you're writing, you're also going to perfect the lead. So the lead is the first sentence of any news story, and it usually has to contain all of the really important information that people definitely have to know when they come out of reading that story. All the important stuff goes right at the beginning, and all of the kind of superfluous and extra information that's just sort of interesting and not totally relevant kind of goes near the end of an article. Because as I'm sure lots of people know, not everybody reads articles all the way through. So you want to make sure that they get all the important stuff right at the beginning. Pull out some quotes from your interview. That's usually a really fun thing to do. Kind of get to use people's words the way that they said them to you and in context and give it a little flavor. And then polish up your headline. Headlines are super important. It's the thing that people click on when you see something on your news feed, the headline is supposed to catch you and catch your interest and make you want to read that story bad enough that you click on it. So headlines are super important. Of course, every article goes through an editing process, usually your own and then somebody else, depending on how your newsroom is structured. And then it goes through a layout process, sometimes done by yourself, sometimes done by a separate department, depends on, your print and your web, the way that things are working. And then once things are published, it's also my responsibility to issue corrections if there are any errors or, misrepresented information or anything like that. The goal, my personal goal is to not have to issue corrections because I want to, of course, be accurate and clear and doing a good job when I write and sharing information that didn't necessarily come from me. But I do issue them from time to time. And then somewhere in the middle of all of that process, I personally am also responsible for all of the photos that go with my stories, whether that means, going out and taking them myself, or tracking them down from another source and having them supplied. It's my responsibility to make sure that happens so that I can publish a photo with a story. And it's also my job to find stories. That's actually a lot of what I do during the day outside of when I'm interviewing and writing is, tracking down stories of interest, things that I think might make a good headline, a good article, and might, pique someone's interest in my community to stop and read them. And in terms of assignments, our newsroom has sort of like an unofficial coverage understanding. I handle a lot of community events and fundraisers and sort of the fluffy personal pieces, heartwarming stories, people in the community. I have a coworker who almost exclusively covers City Hall, school board meetings, municipal police reports, investigative journalism. That's kind of his niche and he's really good at that. I have another coworker who covers sports. He's our sports expert and he knows pretty much everybody who's ever been an athlete in Moose Jaw. It's amazing. And most newsrooms are kind of set up that way, but not necessarily. We kind of all do a little bit of a mix of everything because we're there to help each other out, basically. So yes, next slide, Mr. Thanks. So here's a picture of my desk. These are all of the things that I use every day, all day, and they're definitely required for what I do. So a computer, of course, a lot of my work is done online, a phone, duh. And I also have a call recording app on my phone and a handheld audio recorder so that I'm always prepared to record interviews with my source, partially for accuracy, partially for legal reasons. And I'll talk a little bit about that, I think, on a later slide. And then because I record so much, I also use a transcription program. Some people choose to do this by hand, taking their audio and typing it out to get their quotes. Some people use a program. It's really a personal preference, but they are super helpful. A camera, photo editing software, because I do my own photos. A press pass. It's always good for people to know who I am and why I'm taking pictures of sometimes weird things. A copy of the Canadian Press Style Guide. Canadian Press is the kind of regulatory body for journalism in Canada. And so they put out a style guide every couple of years to sort of direct journalistic writing. So it covers everything from grammar, spelling, formatting, how you address photo captions, how you interview for sports, pretty much everything you need to know about how to write journalistic style is in the Canadian Press Style Guide. And the Captain Spelling Handbook, which is sort of like the partner book. It's kind of like a dictionary almost. Super, super important. I use that probably 10 to 20 times a day, easily. I use it all the time. InDesign, which is one of the most common layout programs used among newspapers. It's not necessarily something you need to have a really in-depth knowledge of, because there is usually, people who are trained in InDesign to handle that portion of the process. But it's good to know just a little bit of how it works and why we use it the way we use it. And then, of course, pen and paper. As much as my job takes place digitally, on my phone, on my computer, I use a ton of pen and paper. I got notebooks everywhere. I have pens in every single bag that I carry. Because it's super helpful to always have a pen nearby and be able to scribble notes as you hear them to help yourself later. Um, Next slide, thank you. So journalism is a pretty straightforward idea. I mean, when most people think of a reporter, they think of, that person on the 6 o'clock news with the big fancy microphone that's, giving a segment about something that's happened. And that's what some of us do. That is totally a thing. There's also some stuff that we do kind of behind the scenes that not a lot of people know about. So like I said, reading and transcribing sources, especially for accuracy. If you're going to quote somebody, you want to make sure you get their words right. And especially for legal purposes, kind of for the same reason. You can't say that somebody said something when they didn't actually say it that way. So you want to make sure you're accurate that way. FOIs are kind of interesting. They're called Freedom of Information Requests. And they're official requests that you can submit to government institutions like ministries, like crowns, agencies, commissions, etc. And also to sort of local institutions like school boards, like post-secondary institutions, your municipality, your municipal government, health authorities, that kind of thing. And they're basically requesting information under the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. You can ask for records, you can ask for any kind of information deemed public, financial reports, meeting minutes, emails between officials, legal documents, that sort of thing. Because it is the public's right to know those things. And it is those institutions' responsibility to provide that information when it's requested. The thing about FOIs that I thought was kind of interesting, people might know, is that they actually cost you money. So it's free to submit an FOI to make that request, but as soon as that institution starts working on it, you actually have to pay them. They charge you printing fees, they charge you prep fees. There is a monetary number attached to those. So I thought that was maybe something people wouldn't know a lot about. Print embargoes. Sometimes journalists get to know things ahead of time. Sometimes you'll get a press release from a government institution on a Friday that you're actually not allowed to publish until Monday when the announcement is officially made. So you get to sit on that knowledge for several days, which is always super fun. But it gives you a chance to be prepared and have something written up and ready to go as soon as it's clear to go. Story digging. Not everything turns into a headline. So I spend a lot of time on social media, looking up things that might be of interest to pursue, taking phone calls, story tips from the public, talking to people in my newsroom, people in my community for things that might be interesting to turn into a story. But they don't always pan out. I spend a lot of time doing that. Doesn't always turn into a story. You have to kind of pick and choose your headlines and make sure they're of interest. I'm kind of in partnership with that, lots of networking. There's so much networking in this kind of career. I talk to so many people who are fellow journalists. I talk to so many people who are, fundraising organizers in the community, people who run the cultural center, run the museums. I'm in touch with so many people all of the time, and it's really good to build those connections and have a good working relationship with those people, because it'll definitely help you down the road. So you can't really get by without any networking. It's hard. You could try, but it's hard. Community involvement. Lots of people don't realize that newspapers are not a government institution. We make our own money. We pay our own way. We're not subsidized. So we actually need to make revenue in order to print. Some newspapers charge a subscription. Others rely on things like ad sales and other campaigns in partnership with other groups in the community. So we need to keep a good working relationship within our community, with our local businesses and our nonprofits, so that we can continue to build that revenue and publish the way that we want to publish. So we do operate kind of like a business. And freelancing. So freelancing is a really big part of the industry too. I personally don't know a ton about it. I haven't done a lot of freelancing, but I know that it's a really, really, really big portion of the industry, and the number of people who are working, they do a lot of freelancing. Staff positions can be kind of coveted. So freelancing is an easy way for people to get their foot in the door, basically. Being a journalist is a lot like kind of building a personal brand, almost marketing yourself as a writer, as someone who knows things and about maybe certain topics even. So you really have to be able to market your skill set individually. as both, someone who's unique and someone who can kind of fit into a newsroom, sort of like a chameleon. And freelancing is a really good place to start with that, and it's a really important place to keep that in mind. So I included some photos from some really cool kind of coverage things that I've done since I started here at the Moose Jaw Express. On the very right-hand side of that slide is, it's a photo of me at the Community Police Academy at the Moose Jaw Police Service last fall. They invited me as a media person to sit in on the 6-week community educational sessions to learn about how the police force works and, how they train, the way that they, teach their incoming recruits, I guess you would say. It was a really cool experience, and I don't think a lot of people can say that they've actually fired a police-issued handgun in their municipal police services private range. So that was definitely cool. Something that not just everybody gets to do. Just to the right there is a photo of the CP Holiday train that came through Moose Jaw last winter. Headliner was, I believe, Mackenzie Porter. And so I got to be, right front row when that happened. I believe that was the year Moose Jaw raised like the second largest amount of food on the North American tour, which was really impressive. Just below that is a photo of my camera at one of the many awards galas that I cover. Those are kind of fun to do. There's something that I don't think a lot of people think of journalists as going to, but I go to lots of like galas and awards nights and like business things. And they can be really fun. You get usually a free meal. Not always, but sometimes. Just to the right of that photo is a once in a lifetime shot of Mac the Moose with his antlers on the ground. This happened right after I'm not sure if you remember this, but the Moose War that we fought with a little town of Norway over who has the world's tallest moose statue. And so during that whole kerfuffle, our community raised a ton of money. It was like $30,000 to replace Mac's antlers to make sure that he was the tallest moose in the world. So I honestly don't know when the next time Mac will ever have his antlers on the ground like that. It could be decades from now. So I got to witness that sort of historical moment, which was pretty cool. Just the top right-hand corner photo is a picture of Cricket, who is one of the burrowing owls who lives at the Burrowing Owl Interpretive Center. He stopped by our office for a visit because we were hosting a giveaway in partnership with the center. Again, not a lot of opportunities to be within a foot of a burrowing owl. Like, that was pretty cool. And definitely not something that I would have gotten to do just any day. It was because of where I work. And then the last photo in the corner there is my press pass from the 2020 Scotties Tournament of Hearts. Moose Jaw hosted the National Women's Curling Championship last year, and it was incredible. It was a week-long kind of blur, honestly, but it was some of my favorite coverage stories that I think I've ever done. It was a really cool experience. I got to be right behind the media bench for the whole tournament, which is definitely something I would recommend. It was really awesome. Really cool part of my job. So what's the best part? I think my favorite part about what I do is knowing that I'm providing information to the public that they not only need, but they deserve to know. I spend a lot of my time, looking through press releases and digging through event listings and asking questions about important things that the people around me, they may never know otherwise, if I didn't do that job for them. So I think it's a really important thing. Even in some cases, you get the chance to hold officials accountable for what they're doing or maybe not doing. And I think media plays a really important role in that power dynamic and in that kind of spread of information. And I also really enjoy the more personal side of it, where I get to connect with people and hear their stories, listen to their passion on a topic that they know a lot about, that they really want to share with other people. And then I get to share that passion with my audience of readers, usually in a way that they maybe otherwise wouldn't have gotten the opportunity. There's always so many cool things happening within a community that are like worth being celebrated. You know, people doing good work, people supporting each other. And in a lot of cases, my headlines, when I write them, help get the word out, help kind of put a spotlight on those things, which I think is really, really cool. And it's always a, you know, good feeling when you're making a positive difference. I write a lot about like GoFundMe's and fundraisers and stuff. And so just knowing that I'm helping out in that little way is definitely a bonus for me. What else? Never dull. It is honestly never dull. There's something new happening every single day. I joke sometimes that I'm a 5-minute expert because I kind of am. You know, I go through so many different topics just during like one day of work that there's honestly no time to like sit and stew, I guess. Like I just get to like learn so many things. And it's always different every single day. You know, I rarely ever kind of circle back and learn the same things twice. So that's kind of fun. It's nice and fast paced. And it's also pretty flexible. I get to do things kind of my own way within my day structure. I do have deadlines, of course, and I do answer to my editors, but I kind of get to choose the way that I want to build my day, how I want to do things. And I get the opportunity to pitch stories that I'm personally excited about, things that I think are really cool, things that I would like to write about. I have that opportunity. I can bring that to my editor and see if, you know, we're interested in pursuing stuff like that. So that's kind of fun. A lot of my time is self-governed because of that, but I think that's okay. It's nice in a way. Developing community trust and making connections. I've been here long enough that I've kind of built these community connections with well-known people around town. And it's sort of a cool feeling. You know, they come to me when they have story tips and ideas. And I'm able to go to them when I have questions and things that I'm interested in doing. And it's a really good partnership. It's really nice to know that your community trusts you to do things like that for them. You know, if they've got things that they want to get out there, they know that you can do that for them. And that's a good feeling. People kind of get to know your name almost and recognize you. Maybe not your face, but definitely your name, your byline, for sure. And also, it's kind of a confidence builder. You know, there's a lot of skills that you develop working in a job that's kind of this fast-paced and this kind of self-regulated, that you definitely build confidence in yourself because you're really relying on yourself. So, you know, critical thinking skills, communication skills, writing skills, obviously, organization, the whole gambit. You really get a chance to define yourself that way. If someone had asked me 5 years ago if I would do a presentation like this, I probably never would have said yes. But I've been here long enough that I feel more confident in myself and I can do something like this, obviously. So also definitely a plus. I really like that aspect of it as well. And then the tough parts. There are some tough parts about this job. It's not all roses and rainbows. It is the fast pace. I've got it on both lists here because it can get a little overwhelming and stressful. Sometimes things come in so fast and they're time sensitive that it really kind of wrench in that schedule that you've built for yourself. But you have to be able to adjust. And that can cause a little bit of stress. It can also cause you to work some unusual hours. This happens outside the regular 9 to 5. It doesn't care about your life schedule. It will happen whether you want it or not, which means that I end up working a lot of overtime hours to sort of meet those deadlines and get that last minute stuff in. It's quite often my schedule is based on somebody else's schedule. You know, when I'm eating interviews or when information comes into me, when I'm, you know, waiting on photos or whatever, they don't really follow deadlines the way that I follow my deadlines. So quite often you go unanswered or you have to wait or you work a little bit late because you're waiting on something. Truthfully, I get ghosted a lot, a lot of unanswered messages. It's just part of the job. You just kind of have to shrug it off and keep moving forward. It's also a position in which you have to ask some hard questions. And sometimes they're questions that people don't want to answer you about. Whether it's a politician that doesn't want to provide comment on an issue that's come up because it's a sensitive topic and they don't have a prepared statement. Maybe you're speaking with someone who's recently experienced a tragedy. It can get uncomfortable, and you have to be the kind of person who can sort of push those hard questions when they're needing to be pushed, and maybe letting go a little bit when you sense that they need to be let go. It's sort of a hard line to walk, but it's definitely an important one that you have to keep in mind. And another thing about journalistic writing is that the defining aspect of journalism is that it's unbiased. So you have to consider all sides of a topic when you approach it without letting your own feelings interfere. You kind of have to set your own opinions aside, which can be kind of difficult sometimes. Sometimes you don't get to be the opinionated person, and you have to just sort of hold it in and talk to people, talk to things that you don't maybe agree with. Because it's not your job to offer an opinion, it's your job to report the facts. Also, confidentiality and morality decisions. This is a really tough thing that I still personally struggle with, even after working in this industry for several years. Sometimes you have to make on-the-fly decisions about confidentiality, stuff like, what details should I share that my source has given me? How do I protect my sources who are wanting to stay anonymous while still digging into this story that needs to be shared publicly? Those are questions that come up, not always, but often, and they're tough ones to answer. They really put a pressure on you to maintain that confidentiality and to protect the people who deserve to be protected. And you also have to kind of ask yourself, am I doing things morally? And this is more of a personal moral code I'm talking about. I mean, like, are you taking pictures of people who maybe wouldn't want their picture taken? How do you protect people's privacy when you're at a big public event and, you're interviewing, you're taking photos, you're whatever? It's something that comes up quite often because of libel. And I'll explain libel a little bit because it's a really big part of the industry. Libel is best explained as defamation. So a published and false statement that has proven to be damaging to a person's reputation or livelihood. It's the biggest reason why journalists record everything, because libel suits are often really vicious. If you have a source come back and hit you with a libel suit, it's really, really bad for your reputation and for your publication's reputation. And quite often, they don't pull punches at all. Lawyers will often go after, the little guy rather than the big company in order to force an out-of-court settlement. And it can be really damaging to not only your reputation, but your finances. So you have to be really careful with libel, and you have to be really careful with that confidentiality. It's a huge thing. It's present all the time throughout this job every day. And then the last thing is negative public perception and criticism. It's everywhere. It's all out there. I'm sure everybody's heard the term fake news. I'm sure everybody's heard complaints about how, the news is depressing and they only ever share bad stuff. And no, I don't want to listen to 6 o'clock news anymore. There's not a lot you can do about negative opinions of media. Of course, do the best job that you can, but there are just some people whose minds won't be changed. So you have to get used to hearing that negativity and hearing that criticism and learning how to brush it off and not taking it too personally. All right, numbers, the important stuff, right? So salary varies depending on where you work and who you work for. So for example, a privately owned newspaper in Moose Jaw probably isn't paying the comparable salary to like the Toronto Star, based on location and the size of that paper. So I did a little research and just put together this little graph, kind of like a ballpark range of salary. So the entry level usually in Canada ranges anywhere from like $25,000 a year to $40,000 a year. It again depends on where you are and who you're working for. I personally am currently in this tier in entry level. I've got about 2 years of work under my belt. When I was applying to jobs previously, Entry level is kind of like 3 to 5 years experience. So I've got a few years to go before I kind of graduate upwards. The average salary, the most common average salary is usually in the $50,000 to $70,000 range. And that's kind of like the common numbers that you would see for most journalists. That's sort of like, I don't want to say the median tier because it kind of isn't. There is room to grow from there, but that's sort of the most normal kind of wage you'd be looking at in a career like this. But that's not to say that you can't go higher. The top dogs in the industry make lots and lots of money. I pulled up a few examples. So Lisa LaFlemme, who's the lead anchor for CTV National News, she makes $350,000 a year. And she's in a very publicly known face, right? She's almost a celebrity. For a US equivalent, Matt Lauer hosted the Today Show on NBC. He makes like $25 million a year. So there is room to go big in this industry. It really just depends on where you want to take yourself and how much effort you're willing to put into this, because the ceiling is super high if you want it to be and if you're willing to let it be. And so benefits, these are just kind of my personal benefits. And again, these will differ based on your contract, based on where you work, that sort of thing. So personally, my contract gives me a full health and dental insurance. I also pay into life insurance policy, and I get a monthly vehicle stipend. So I get an extra couple $100 on my paycheck to compensate me for use of my vehicle during my workday. I don't personally pay into a pension plan, but that's not necessarily unheard of. I just pay into like the Canadian pension plan on my taxes or whatever. But they do exist. It's not that there's no pension plans out there. I get 3 weeks paid vacation accrued, which means that I sort of build up my vacation hours as I work my way through the year. And I come out the other end with 3 weeks vacation, and they do carry over. So it's not like you lose them or anything. And I typically work about 40 hours a week. I am a salaried employee, so it's kind of a tough thing to put into numbers, but I work about 40 hours a week, 5 days a week, 8-hour shifts, often involving evenings and weekends. Like I said, sometimes you end up working kind of weird overtime hours, and quite often it's on evening and weekends. And like I said, overtime, it definitely happens. Expect overtime in the journalism industry for sure. So balancing work and life. This is the third time I've mentioned it. I work a lot of overtime, partially because I like to meet my deadlines as quickly and as efficiently as possible. It's a really important part of my job. And so I find myself quite often taking work home a lot because it's beneficial for me to make myself available all of the time, whether that's, taking phone calls or answering emails or messages, or, traveling to go meet with an interview to take photos. I try to be flexible. Flexibility is really important because, I've got stories and I need them in when they need to be in. So that it can be kind of a challenge to draw that line between work and life. It's definitely a personal challenge. It's sort of up to you to decide when, working is necessary and when you're overworking. And so I just listed a few of the weird places that I've done my job from, because I do a lot of my job away from my desk. I would say I probably spend half my time at my desk and half my time out and about on site covering. So I've done some work from some weird places. The backseat of my car, an empty field that was designated to become, it's going to be a new school actually here in Moose Jaw, sitting on a curb outside of Tim Hortons, on a ferry ride across the lake, on a park bench surrounded by ducks, from an ice fishing shack on one of my weekends, from an empty locker room at Mosaic Place Stadium where the hockey team plays, from a courthouse bathroom, wrapped in a blanket on my couch, and probably a million more. I've done some work from some weird places, but it's kind of fun a little bit. It's kind of, I don't want to say exciting because sometimes it's a little overwhelming, but it is exciting in a way. So what does the industry look like? So I think I've talked a little bit about, kind of what I experience and how my job looks. But that's not to say that my job is exactly the same as every other staff reporter's job. Every newsroom's a little bit different. Every contract's a little bit different. The base kind of stays the same, what you can expect to do. But things, of course, are always a little bit different with different employers. In terms of education, what you need to get into the journalism industry, there isn't really one clear path. And lots of journalists will tell you this, that there's no like set requirements to become a journalist. You can either go to post-secondary school, you cannot go to school. It's really kind of where your journey takes you. So in terms of post-secondary options, there's lots of journalism schools, even in Canada, but all over the world, that would offer you a really great basis to get into the industry. There's lots of university programs. You can go and take a bachelor's like I did, from an unrelated, I guess maybe not unrelated, but from a different topic, whether it's a bachelor's of English, maybe you like science, maybe you like, I don't know, psychology. You can definitely take that bachelor's program and still get yourself into a writing position. Or you can take a tech program. For example, Sask Polytech has a really good communications diploma program that would lead you to a career in journalism. Or you can not go to school. You can use other writing experience or other life experiences to set you apart, maybe as a freelancer, and then work your way into a staff position. All you really need is a strong set of writing skills, a good work ethic, and the ability to network. Those are kind of the key components. And in terms of journalism schools, like the U of R has a really good journalism program. There's also a few other like top tier schools in Canada. There's Ryerson University in Toronto. They have a great journalism program. There's Carleton University in Ottawa, great program. UBC, King's College in Halifax. There's plenty of options all over the country. And, if you decide not to go to school, my biggest advice would be to not be afraid to send cold pitches to editors. Email editors of publications that you're interested in being featured in with story ideas, fleshed out story pitches, let them know that you're interested in writing, give them kind of a taste of what you can do, and see what happens. You might get rejected, you might not. Professional associations. So I mentioned the Canadian Press earlier. It's kind of the regulatory body for journalistic standards in Canada. The Associated Press is the United States equivalent. Those are both really big organizations to know about if you're planning on being a journalist. Super important. There's also the Canadian Association of Journalists, it's like a member-based journalist association. They offer lots of, like industry insights and analysis, professional development courses, stuff like that. It's a paid membership, basically. And then I also added in the Saskatchewan Weekly Newspapers Association, just for sort of a local splash in there. So there's tons of littler associations like that are kind of more specific, that are definitely worth your time to join. And then, I guess speaking of professional development, they kind of go hand in hand. Professional development is largely personally driven in this industry. Like I said before, there's kind of no set formula for success. Every journalist takes a different path and a different journey to get where they're going. That's not to say there aren't opportunities. You just kind of have to seek them out yourself. Your employer is probably not going to send them your way. There are lots of mentorship programs, especially through the Canadian Association of Journalists. They have a really cool mentorship program that's worth checking out. But there's also, that kind of connection, that networking thing. Once again, if you really admire someone, reach out, ask them some questions. They might be willing to talk with you. And like I mentioned way at the beginning, there are post-secondary scholarships available in this industry. There's a lot more offered to students who go to J school, just because J schools are usually kind of partnered with big media corporations to offer, like internships and stuff like that as part of their curriculum. But there are scholarships for students who don't go to J school. Myself is a perfect example. I received 2 communication scholarships despite being an English major, but I had intent to go into communications, so I qualified. Um, unions. Unions are more popular with larger employers. I personally don't belong to a union. I'm not employed by a big enough company for that to be a thing. When I say larger employers, I mean like larger employers like CBC, like Canadian Press, like the big dogs. There's also the CWA Canada, which is one of the most prominent union associations in Canada right now. They represent CBC, Canadian Press, Vice Media, and I think a handful of newspapers across Canada, none of which are in Saskatchewan. So they're kind of for like the bigger centers. But they're definitely one to keep an eye on. If a union is something you're interested in working in, they are out there. You just have to look for them and find a newsroom in which you get that option. And there are freelance union options. Again, I don't know a ton about freelancing, but I do know that there are things out there that you can look into and join. Sometimes, this might be interesting too, sometimes newsrooms will actually unionize themselves. So, instead of joining like a big union like CWA, a newsroom will become its own union. For example, this is what immediately comes to mind for me, the main office of the Huffington Post. Their newsroom, their editorial staff are unionized as Huffington Post employees. But it's not universal. So like the main office is unionized, but the Canadian office is not, of Huffington Post, for example. So again, it's a thing that's more happens more often in bigger newsrooms and bigger centers, but it definitely is a thing that happens. And awards opportunities. The Pulitzer Prize, I'm sure, is something that everybody has heard of once or twice. That's like the top tier, like the Nobel Prize for journalism, basically. So that's kind of the dream, right? There's also smaller awards that are given out throughout the year. The Online Journalism Awards are a big one. They celebrate excellence in digital journalism around the world. They're definitely really cool to keep an eye on. There's lots of awards from like membership associations as well. The one that immediately comes to mind for me is the Saskatchewan Weekly Newspaper Association. They host an annual awards gala to hand out awards to Saskatchewan journalists for their work in newspaper publishing. So they're very cool. One thing I will say about journalism as an industry is that journalists tend to create their own little communities with each other. It's an industry where you move positions a lot, you interact with each other a lot, and you really get to know people even if you're not necessarily from the same publication. Maybe you don't work in the same newsroom, but you see each other out and about during coverage. It's a really cool kind of connection that you make with people. You spend so much time working in newsrooms with your weird hours and out and about covering events, and you see all these people all the time. You really get to know each other even if you don't necessarily work side by side, which I think is it's kind of nice. It's a really interesting thing about the industry that maybe not everybody can say about their own job. Okay, I feel like I'm talking a lot. What can you do in journalism? I get this question all the time. Is journalism really a dying industry? Aren't newspapers all going out of business? Even after people know that I work in media, they ask me this. And I will say, no, journalism is not dying. Newspapers are not dying. The whole industry is evolving. There are newspapers who are struggling, but the ones who aren't are the ones who have adapted a new business model and expanded their reach, expanded the things that they're doing in their newsroom. And for that reason, they're not dying. That's not true. It's an evolving industry. We're largely adapting to having both a print and an online presence because we go where our audience is. And that's not to say that there isn't an audience on, TV, radio, newsstands, but the audience is largely moving online as well. And so you have to kind of do the same. So yeah, like I mentioned, print, radio, television, broadcast, these are kind of the core mediums inside of journalism, which is kind of a huge umbrella industry that covers a million different things. But these are sort of the big three. when you're thinking about becoming a reporter, you'll have to kind of make a decision. Do you want to work in print? Do you want to work in radio? Do you want to work in broadcast? Do you want to be a video journalist? Which are those people on the 6 o'clock news with doing the segments? Those are video journalists. And there are opportunities across Canada in all of these fields. Whatever you're interested in, whichever medium, there's room for you. And then there's also, once you have an idea of what you'd like to do, print, media, or TV, there's also different types of journalistic writing. Let me just scroll down here. So there's investigative journalism, there's, opinion writing, there's sports writing, there's news writing, there's a really big area for like business and trade writing, political coverage, entertainment writing. It really just depends on what you're interested in spending most of your day doing. You can definitely kind of specialize into those types of column writing. But there's also quite a few different ways of writing. So, maybe you don't want to be a staff reporter like what I do. Maybe you don't want, the press releases bombarding you every day. Maybe you'd rather be a columnist, where you kind of make your own pace. Maybe you'd like to write for magazines. Maybe you'd like to be a blog writer, music reviews, entertainment news, social media copy even is becoming a really big part of journalism. There's all kinds of different ways that you can use journalism as like a tool for writing. What else have I got on here? And it's honestly getting to be very uncommon to write strictly for print. There's almost always a digital component to most publications these days, but it is possible to just choose one or the other. It really just depends what you pursue. My recommendation, of course, would be to do both because the industry is evolving and we are moving to a digital space. So it's definitely good to have experience in both of those ways. It's also worth noting that you can take a very specific interest and specialize, become known for writing a certain type of story. Maybe you went to school and you have a Bachelor of Science and you want to do science writing. Like, that's definitely possible. Maybe you're interested in medicine and you want to write articles about medicine, lifestyle articles. Again, political coverage is a huge one. Beauty is getting to be a really big industry. There's tons of websites looking for writers who can write about beauty. Video gaming is a huge, huge, huge thing that's growing right now. There's like a whole sector of video gaming journalism that's gotten super popular. Whatever it is you're interested in, there is probably some way that you can use that and become a writer. It's also possible to, there's other jobs within the industry that aren't just strictly, sitting down and writing articles. There's, broadcast requires people with on-air talent, to be on camera. There's people behind the camera that are super, super necessary. Pretty much all newsrooms need someone skilled in photography. Almost every newsroom has, an editing expert, but sometimes even a whole department of people who are just there to do the editing and the proofreading. And that goes for both words, like print, and video, people who put together the B-roll for the news. That's definitely a thing, especially because social media is getting bigger. Lots of media companies are sharing videos specifically on their social media channels that maybe necessarily don't make it onto like the news because they have a different set of B-roll for that. So video editing is a thing. Also research. There's a really big need for people who do research. So like big broadcaster companies will have whole teams of just researchers doing research for pieces. The journalist will put it together in a story. There's a team of people explicitly just finding the information that journalist would need and digging through stuff like FOIs, for example. Communications positions. This is kind of an interesting kind of connector. to journalism. It's sort of a natural evolution for a lot of journalists to go into becoming a communications manager or like a media relations person. Lots of government jobs doing that, lots and lots of government jobs. But I see a lot of people do this, and it's definitely viable. Definitely kind of like a step maybe to the side and upwards, depending on where you're at. But worth thinking about. If that's what you're interested in doing is media relations, a journalistic background is a really good place to start to get into that. And again, journalistic experience, it can translate into so many other jobs and industries. I mean, writing skills and communication skills are so helpful no matter what you're doing. You can do just about anything with them. They're always good to have. So even if you do dig into journalism and you decide that it's maybe not exactly what you want to do, it can open a lot of doors for you to go elsewhere and use those skills in other ways. Especially because I think media plays a really important role in society. And although people might have reservations about journalistic writing, it is a really easy way to get into writing because there are so many things kind of laid out in the way you do them. You don't have to think too super hard about it. It's already kind of structured for you, and you can grow your skills as you go along. So yeah, if you have any questions about being a journalist or getting into journalism or what it's like, please feel free to reach out and ask them to me. I would love to answer them. I would love to offer some of my expertise. I don't know if I can call it that since it's only fairly new, but I would love to chat. I can take emails. I've got my email address listed there. I've also got my Twitter handle. Twitter is a really big journalism thing. There's tons of journals on Twitter. That's kind of our platform. So feel free to DM me. They're open. You can also check out my personal portfolio, it's a website that I've got up with all of my sort of interesting stories that I've written, kind of like a digital portfolio. And if anyone's interested in getting into journalism and giving it a try, I encourage students to reach out to us at The Express to help out with an internship experience. That's how I got into this industry. I had shot an email to the editor here back when I was in university asking if they would be interested in taking on a summer student, just kind of like a cold email, no prompting. And she said yes, and she took me on, and I spent a summer out here, and then later returned to the newsroom after I had convocated with my degree. So feel free to try that. Reach out to us if you're interested in spending a summer working as a reporter. We would love to have you. We'll see what we can do for you. So yeah, is there any questions at all?
Thanks, Larissa. That was awesome. One of the questions I thought of during your presentation was the liability or for libel. Do you guys carry insurance for libel, I would guess?
I don't know for sure if we have, an insurance, but we definitely have lawyers on standby, specifically for us that we're in contact with in case we need any kind of legal advice. And there are specific lawyers out there who do deal just with sort of journalism and publishing issues. So yeah, we have a lawyer on standby for that.
Larissa, you mentioned the portfolio. Is that a good thing for students to ship out if they're looking for one of those internships places or placements, to have a portfolio that they can give some examples?
Absolutely, yeah. So I would say having a writing portfolio is just as good as having a resume when you're sending out things for job applications and stuff. It's almost like being an artist. Artists have portfolios of their work. Journalists do as well. It's definitely a handy thing to have. And for students who are maybe, thinking about getting to build that portfolio, freelancing, you can freelance or writing columns for your local newspaper is maybe a good place to start. If you're headed into university, look up your undergraduate newspaper, because most of them are run by volunteers, by undergraduate students, and they would love to take you on as a writer and teach you how to do that and help you build that portfolio. I started my career at the Sheaf, which is the undergraduate newspaper in Saskatoon. And it was an incredible experience. It taught me so much about the industry, and it started my portfolio. So I would definitely recommend putting something together, even just, yeah, writing samples, if that's what you've got. Definitely be useful.
Where do you see your own personal career going? What are your aspirations right now going from, or is this where you'd like to stay? Are you a Moose Jaw gal?
Oh, I love that question. That's great. I really love where I'm at. I love this job. We have a really great newsroom here. I think Moose Jaw is a really great community. And I'm really enjoying being on staff the way that I am. Personally, looking to the future, I have an interest in editing. So I would love to get into a newsroom where I can do kind of strictly copy editing or proofreading. But I'm not opposed to continuing to write. And I really like the community stuff. So if I ever, decide to move on, which I'm not really thinking seriously about right now because I do like my newsroom, but I would like to move into sort of the more culture writing, covering the arts, covering the music industry, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm just trying to think of other questions here. You did such an awesome presentation, very in depth, and
Thank you.
the only thing and then you did answer at the end, was your own personal education. So you don't have a journalism degree. You came through with a science major?
No. So I didn't go to journalism school.
That's sorry, science, English I meant, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So I took a Bachelor of English. And then, like I said, I kind of mentioned earlier, the Sheaf. During my second year of university, I stumbled across the Sheaf, the undergrad paper at the University of Saskatchewan, and got involved. I spent actually 3 years working with the Sheaf. And that's what really sparked my interest in journalism, and kind of got me kickstarted with the experience I needed to get into the industry post-convocation.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad that you liked my presentation. I don't remember ever having anyone come to talk to us when I was in high school about journalism. So I was really excited to be able to share a little bit about it. I think it's an industry that people don't really think a lot about.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely an industry that's taken a hit too the last few years, and I think your emphasis on not only the legalities but also the code of conduct for
Mm-hmm.
reporters and stuff is really important for kids to know.
It is, absolutely. It's a very cool job to do. There's lots of fun things that you get to do as part of your day. It's also a very serious job. You have to take it very seriously because it is such an important role. If you're not accurate, if you're not sharing things that are true and can be proven, then you're not really doing anyone a good service, right? And so it's definitely something you have to take very seriously if you're considering going into it.
I think it's one of those rare outlets for writing.
It is, yeah. It's I get to be creative all day, every day, and I may be limited by writing a headline, writing a lead, writing quotes, but I get to kind of play with that however I want to all of the time, and it's fun. It really kind of challenges you. I feel like I come home at the end of the day and my brain's a little bit fried because I've spent so much time thinking so intensely about so many different topics, but I feel better for it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Larissa, for your time. Again, if any students are watching this presentation, please fill in the survey and enter for a chance to win a $50 gift certificate. Thanks again, Larissa. That was great.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.